out of college, I went straight into the military. I was in the ROTC program, did officer stuff in the military for 4 years. Technically, I was an armor officer, so I was really highly trained in small-scale tactical maneuver warfare with tanks and Humvees, and well, not MRAPs and other things deployed, but ended up doing primarily logistics. I had a degree in computer and systems engineering, and then when I left, I shot off a couple of resumes to two companies. One was Riot, one was Blizzard, and that's just because at the time I was playing StarCraft 2 and League of Legends, and I didn't know who made League of Legends. I knew who made StarCraft 2 at the time. This is 2011, and so I looked up League of Legends, like, who makes this? They said Riot. I was like, oh, right, yeah, okay, I think I've seen that before. Sent out an application. Never heard back from Blizzard. Riot got back to me. I think the reason Riot got back to me is they realized they wanted leaders more than they needed game dev expertise based on how fast they were scaling and growing. And so they were bringing in people from a lot of different places who they felt would be capable leaders. And they were like, well, you've got a history in the military. You've been trained in leadership. Yeah, you don't know much, but you've got a computer and systems engineering background, so you're not totally technically illiterate. And you really like our game, which I did. Actually, that was a time when I was playing more StarCraft 2, and then slowly League of Legends was like, I was playing that more and more and more, and StarCraft 2 less and less and less. And survived the interview process over the next, I don't know, whatever, it took a couple months, and then started working there late 2011, dropped right into a team. I've always liked esports and competitive spaces, so I started working on a team there, but must have been within 6 weeks, they moved me over to the champion team because they had one of their producers leave that team to go somewhere else, and they thought, well, he did logistics in the military, hopefully he can figure this out. And I can tell you right now, those two things are not very similar, but problem solving applies everywhere. So that's what I did and figured it out for the next set of years.
So you got to give an answer to the question I was about to ask you, but how does your military experience and the leadership there kind of translate into games? I think anyone listening in is that's really cool. You went from working in the military to now doing leadership in Riot, in what was a Riot Games that was growing very quickly at the time, because League of Legends was kind of in its infancy in 2011. So how did that translate?
It's interesting. Leadership is a generalist skill set. For a lot of people talk a lot of different. I've heard a lot of people have a lot of different takes on where leadership comes from, who's good at it, these sorts of things. Is it natural? Is it learned? Is it blah, blah, blah? And I think there's elements that there's some people that are more intuitively gifted at leadership than others. I think that's fair to say. I think leadership is something that can be learned. The military gave me a unique opportunity to actually have training in leadership, which is fairly rare. A lot of companies recognize that leaders are really valuable, that they have an outsized impact, usually positive or negative, but they don't really know what to do with that because, how do you? I guess go try leading people, and we'll see who's good at it and who's not. And if you're not good at it, do you get Peter principled at some point where now you're stuck in a role you're incompetent at, but we can't bring you down, but you're really good at engineering, so we want to keep your engineering skill in, but we made you an engineering lead, and so now we're confused about what to do with you. And but leadership is something that can be learned. I also think the military gave me a lot of examples of leadership, some good ones that I was able to say, how do I operate like this? How do I learn from this in a way that's going to help me be a better leader? And also bad ones that also can help me learn to be a better leader. I didn't like how you were leading me. Maybe that's a personal thing, but maybe that's also a problem with your leadership style. Maybe I don't take that forward. Maybe I'm careful about how I approach that. So I think leadership was it's been the through line of my career, even going back before college, arguably with things in the Boy Scouts and whatnot, in the military and in game development. Leadership has been that thing that I continue to operate in, continue to teach and train and try to become better at over time, because it is an endless journey and there's always something new to learn in the leadership space. And I think when I got to Riot, I was well set up to lead, even if I didn't understand game development. And so, the logistics piece wasn't as directly helpful, but the leadership and how teams work together and how you might encourage people to collaborate well, and drawing the lines between when do you interact and get involved. I've messed all that stuff up a ton. And in the military, I messed it up a lot. Recognizing that and going, how can I do it better this time? And then just continuing to do that throughout my time at Riot. That was how leadership really played a role. So has high application. It has high application, I think, no matter where you are, because every organization does need leaders.
So someone listening in is thinking, first, I think a lot of people view leadership as something that you learn over time. Like to become a leader in a company, you have to go through the kind of the ranks and kind of rise up, meet the right people, learn the right lessons. But I love your perspective, which is coming from the military, having already engaged in a lot of leadership facets. You're bringing that over into games. How would you define leadership in a company like Riot? What does it mean to actually be a leader? Because I understand there's a thing about kind of promoting proper values, listening to people, bringing teams together under a common vision. But for someone listening that wants like an actual kind of way of explaining it, because sometimes it's wish-washy, right? Like I don't want to say,
Oh yeah.
but like what does it mean to be a leader, right?
Go type into Google, define leadership. Like, give me some definitions of leadership, and you're going to find a bunch of different articles on a lot of different things. For me, I actually went and did that exercise because I was trying to figure out, I know I'm leading. What does that mean? What am I doing? So Riot had an answer to this, and it was related to the culture of the company. And it was that I think it's not the definition of leadership, but it was the expectation of leadership, was to maintain the right goals and create the culture that would allow us to reach them. I don't know if anybody there would have articulated it that way, but that was what they were encouraging leaders to do. A very simple thing that I learned very early in my time there is, as a producer, I was a leader. And as a producer and leader, my job was to make sure bad things didn't reach players. There was no, well, somebody else said it was a good idea, so whatever, I guess I just execute it, even though I think it's a bad idea. That was unacceptable. And that was made clear to me within weeks. I thought I was going to get fired. First time I thought I was going to get fired at Riot. There were many. But that was the first time I thought I was going to get fired, was when somebody shut down a really bad idea that I knew was a really bad idea, but I was from the military. And the military, at least the units I was in, it tended not to be as wise to when somebody who outranked you, which was a big deal in the military, said, we're going to go do this thing. You didn't start asking a ton of questions and saying, I'm not sure that's a good idea. And so I brought that to Riot, and that was the wrong frame. I needed to be the one who was objecting, and that became very clear to me. But I went through this exercise of going, okay, well, what does it mean to be a leader? What is leadership? I ended up looking at all these different things, looking at common elements, and I boiled it down to something that I wanted to keep fairly short, which is leadership is influencing others towards a goal. That is how I define it. There are three key elements there. The most important, I think, is actually the goal. You have a goal, you're trying to get somewhere. If you're not trying to get somewhere, you can't lead anybody, because where are they following you to? They might just be following you because they like following you, but that's not actually leadership. That's just a bunch of people who like to follow you. It's subtly different. You have others involved. There's ideas that I don't want to like pick at the semantics of self-leadership. If you want to engage with that, that's fine. But functionally and definitionally, I don't think self-leadership is as much a thing. When you're leading, others are following. That's the implication. If you're trying to lead and nobody's following, it means you're not leading successfully. And then the third piece of that is influencing. And this can take so many forms. In the military, I could influence by ordering somebody to do something. I could also suggest things. I could also coach. I could teach. I could mentor. I could set an example. And you have all these tools at your disposal to influence the organization. You develop relationships, you develop friendships, you figure out what the politics are, the influence games of the organization, and you figure out how to get things moving in the right direction according to the goal. And so leaders do this. They force multiply the efforts of those around them by influencing others towards the goal. And so those are the key elements that I saw in leadership.
What happens when you have multiple leaders kind of all vying for the leadership? I wouldn't say position, but you're trying to influence what you think are your values or that goal you said that you're trying to bring everyone to accomplish. In many kind of companies, you have multiple leaders, and sometimes, from my perspective as well, it's difficult to assess really how that rank works. Where perhaps in the military, it's a much taller organization. It's really clear to see kind of how everyone stacks up. But in a lot of organizations nowadays, it's a bit of a flatter structure, and leadership is spread out. So how does it work when you have different leaders kind of maybe not clashing, because I don't want to make it sound kind of very combat, but almost they're just trying to influence together or trying to influence at similar times?
So the big thing for me is, are we aligned on the goal or not? And that's something that through influence, those leaders are trying to create. One of the things I joke about is if you don't know what your goal is, suggest one, and the people who are supposed to own the goal will come out and tell you you're wrong, or they'll be like, that's it, perfect, let's go in that direction. If a bunch of people come out and they all have a different goal, it's going to be very difficult to get everybody following the group of you to go to the same place. And so one huge aspect of leadership is this idea of, yes, you have hierarchies inside of almost all structures, and the military, despite the high degree of verticality in the organization, lots and lots of hierarchy, there are interesting circumstances where somebody who outranks somebody else is nonetheless is able to be out-influenced by that other person. And that's by design sometimes, but it's also because sometimes somebody who might have a lower rank may have, for lack of a better term, benefactors inside of the system that are higher rank. And so you have to be careful, and you start learning these things. And we could say, well, that stuff's not ideal, but it is real. It just emerges inside of human organization. And you do, I think, want to limit it. There are absolutely manipulative and negative versions of politics, which is what I'm basically describing. But politics always exist. And the question is, are you willing to engage with that space? The more senior you get inside of an organization, the more you're pushed into engaging in that space. So if I have a group of leaders, for me, I've often worked at either the team of teams, or maybe one layer up from that. So I've had I kind of run the gamut from I'm just one person on a team helping that team, but I often had leaders around me. And a huge question I always had is, where are we trying to go together? If I can get us all going in the same direction together, we are more likely to succeed. If you think the goal is, to use an actual example, perfect visual fidelity, or the best map that we've ever made, or something like that, and I think it's getting something that has high competitive integrity, looks good enough to last for a long time, and serves our current audience, even though there's an overlap between that, there's also a lot that might be different. Which one is more important? Are we going to align on that? And if we don't, you're going to constantly pulling those you have more influence over towards, unbelievable perfection of visual fidelity of the map, and I'm going to be trying to pull people towards competitive integrity, gameplay clarity, and trying to get this thing out the door as rapidly as possible. And again, we're all trying to get the thing out there as rapidly as possible. I don't want to, besmirch the leaders that were around me in that case, in case they hear this. But there's this idea of what are we actually trying to do? What brings this together? And having somebody who owns that decision, be it either a leader of leaders or somebody who has the expertise in the space, where we can say, we're all to some extent peers, but you have expertise in an area that our team is operating within. So we give you more authority in that space. Like a simple example, let's say you had an art lead inside of a context, and I'm a producer. Maybe there's a product manager. Maybe there's a QA lead and design lead. Cool. Maybe the product manager might be thinking about this. I'm defining the audience, and I'm defining what it means for this thing to be ready to ship. The QA is saying, I'm defining the quality bar. The designer is saying, I need this to actually fit within the broader context of the systems of the game. And the art lead is going, hey, I am making sure that my team is doing the right thing according to the right style guide. Also, I have a lot of authority over who gets promoted inside of the art organization, who doesn't. I have a lot of authority over the tools that we're choosing to use as art. But I might go talk to the engineering team when it comes to where do I put the assets when they go into the game, right? How do we get all this stuff checked into Perforce or GitHub or wherever we're doing that? What is that? How do I make that simple? And so there's this constant interaction between these leaders and their areas of expertise. I think it's often helpful to have somebody who is what's the Roman phrase, the first citizen, right? The leader among the leaders, who can break ties. But you don't have to have that. I've actually operated in systems where that wasn't present. Everybody owned their own space and then collaborated with each other. And then the key thing was, are we going in the same direction? That's what you're always trying to create, however you structure it. So you can do that by having one person who is the decider of this is the overall direction. And now everybody has their areas that they lead within. And we all then collectively lead the team or teams underneath us. But yeah. So the most important thing is we're all going in the same direction.
That's so interesting. Because in large companies, I feel like one of the biggest things that slows down progress, or at least let's say progress towards a goal that perhaps is defined from the CEO or from the board, depending on the company structure, One of the things that slows down that progress is that you have leaders often not agreeing or perhaps trying to push for different things or too many things at the same time. And
Hmm.
you need that voice, that decider, that first citizen, like you said. Um, in your experience when you were working at Riot, what was that process like? Because I imagine you walked into a company that was growing immensely. League of Legends was growing in just audience size and people playing.
Oh
Like
yeah.
how what kind of stories do you have of just trying to get in there and
Well,
trying to fix stuff up?
honestly, early on, some of it was realizing when you are in a leadership role, you have to be very careful because your actions have shared consequence. And something I like to say about leaders, leaders, the consequences of a mistake for a leader are felt by other people besides that leader. That's to some extent true for everybody, but it's more so because a leader definitionally has a broader space of influence. They are impacting others, others are following them. And so when you make a mistake, it's not just oops, I'm an engineer and I wrote a bad function and yeah, QA had to find it and it kicked back to me and I had to go fix it. It's like I've made horrific work systems before for teams that I was leading and supposed to be helping. And I was you call all kinds of things arrogant, egotistical, a little bit foolish, inexperienced. Like I was many things, and I in some ways I still am when I get into the wrong environment, and so I have to watch out for those things. Like pride is the death of leadership. Um, but when when I show up to a team, I have this opportunity, but also this huge risk of I can actually impact what everyone's doing. So let's say I was like a scrum master on a team. I can make everybody go to an additional meeting every day. Maybe that's worthwhile. Maybe it's every week. Maybe that's worthwhile. Maybe it's not. Am I actually looking at this through a lens that allows me to evaluate what that impact will be? And another one was when I was first a producer at Riot, I showed up on the champion team. We were all talking about something, and I made a suggestion because everybody was talking and they were brainstorming ideas, and I'm new and I didn't know anything about game development or whatever. And I made a suggestion, and someone was like, "Okay, we'll do that," and it was just like, "Wait, whoa, stop." Because they said to themselves, we're in an organization where producers have a lot of authority. That's a choice that the organization made. It was a product-led organization. Producers were in charge of many things. And so me saying that was some people could just interpret that as, got it, that's what we'll do. And I was like, whoa, no, I don't know what I'm talking about. That was just an opinion like all the other opinions I'm hearing in the room. And all of you know this more than I do. You've been making champions for a long time. I've been making champions for not like for a day. Or 2 days. And I realized that as a leader, this was also something that was true in the military. It's easy. And I think for some people, if they're not paying attention, they don't even realize what's happening. For you to suggest something and other people to go, got it, that's what we should do. Do you actually know what you're doing? Was that actually a good idea? And if you buy your own hubris, you'll be like, oh, excellent. People just like, I guess I have lots of good ideas because everybody's always saying, it's like, no, they're following you because of the role and the authority you have. So I guess I think to come back around to that, like, how do you make that decider? Different organizations will have different models for that. In game development, often design plays a key deciding role around, gameplay, the player experience, tons of stuff like that. Riot made a different choice. It was producers. It was particularly producers who were filling a product owner role. Later on, the discipline of production split. I think it's continued to evolve since I left, so I don't think they have the structure anymore, but it was product management and dev management. The product manager was viewed as the single ringable neck, the person, the leader among leaders, the person who was ultimately responsible for what was happening within that team. That model caused some issues. They shifted it so that you had a role that someone on the team would take on called the team captain. And it wasn't always necessarily the product manager anymore because we'd run into issues where sometimes you'd had an inexperienced product manager with other very experienced leaders around them. And there's nothing wrong with having that person necessarily making all the calls. Sometimes that can be advantageous, but sometimes it was just like, this doesn't make sense. We should have somebody who's actually has a lot more experience and is much more successful in leadership proven, being the team captain, making all these calls, and the product manager can do their role on the product side. So there was evolution there, and again, that's continued to evolve the whole time I was there, and since I left. So I don't know where it is today. But that model of who will do this? Well, let's pick who makes the most sense to do it. So I've been the team captain. I've been the product owner on teams back when that was the model. I've been the team captain. Mostly, I've actually been in the dev management side of things. Operationally, I was like a delivery lead or whatever else, in different roles in that space. But I've done those things, and I do know it can shift how you approach the world when suddenly you're responsible for everything that's happening in this space. And I think I hope people that are in leadership take that very seriously, because you can have a much greater impact than you realize once you've been knighted with that role or title, depending on, again, your context. Because oftentimes it is based on a title and a team that you're on or something like that versus a particular role. Riot had a pretty cool model for it.
And why do big gaming companies, maybe not big gaming, but any gaming company, why do they have different models between producer and product manager? I'm a product manager. I came into a games company, and the way I kind of saw production and product management is product manager is in charge of the what and the why, and production is more the when. But coming in as a product manager to an organization that was largely production led, that kind of led to some, I wouldn't say clashes, but obviously we're trying to figure out, okay, previously the producer kind of did the what, the why, and the when. That clearly seemed to be too much. So we bring in a product manager that's a decision maker. And then you start splitting those two apart. Is that correct? Is that the way to go? Why are there different models? Why isn't there a single model for the whole industry? There must be a best practice. But as the more and more kind of people like yourself that I talk to, professionals, they all tell me a different story.
Yeah. So there's a few different lenses I can view this from. Let me think for a moment about how I wanna break down, why are there different models? Why don't we all just share a best practice? There's a guy, this is a tangent. There's a guy named Steven Pinker, really cool dude. He's kind of famous. He talks about how actually humans are progressing. A lot of times we see doom and gloom on the news, but he often looks at data, and it shows that honestly, fewer people are in poverty than, at any point in history. There's ups and downs in it, but like fewer people are dying in war. There's less disease. In so many ways, humans are doing quite well, even though we can look at the world and go like, oh, but like, politics and war and like, the global warming, all this. And he's like, yeah, and there's a lot of good. And we tend not to focus on it. It's not as interesting. I was watching a podcast with him, and he said something to the effect of, couldn't we all just agree? Because the question was about, well, what are we trying to do? Like, what's the sort of, if we were to frame a goal for humanity, doesn't that require some absolute? And he's like, well, couldn't we all just agree that like we all want betterment for humanity? Like we just want humans to live better lives and happier lives and all these different things. And at the surface level, I'm like, yeah, absolutely. That makes a ton of sense. We should all be striving to some extent to make a better world for our children, for whatever, whether you're religious or non-religious or whatever. Like this shared thing of, wouldn't it be great to live in a better world? The problem is, what does better mean? For somebody, better may relate a lot to meaning and effort and overcoming hardship and experience. For somebody else, it might mean a contented life. For someone else, it might mean happiness and the ability to experience things and to continue to experience things throughout their lives. For someone else, it might be nested inside of community or family. What does better mean? There's different values we can place at the top of like your hierarchy, let's say. So to come back to your question, why do different leadership models emerge? Because I have worked with leaders where I could say, this is the perfect system for me. This is the one I want to work within. And they would say, that system sounds awful. I describe myself as not a culture fit for the military. They have a particular leadership hierarchy, a way that everything works. Some people love it and they thrive there. I was successful. I did my job. I wasn't like bad at what I did. But I was also like, I don't like this model. I don't like the way this hierarchy works. And by the way, that's even too broad of a brush to paint, because not just the military or the army, but even individual units within the army all generate these different, and they might be generally aligned inside of the context of like, well, we're all in the army, we sort of understand how this works, but you get a couple different leaders and they create within them different organizations in terms of the values and the culture. And that's one of the things that's important to realize. Your leaders define your culture, and it's one of the reasons organizations tend to emulate and end up looking like their leaders. They have the same strengths and weaknesses and blind spots as those that are leading them, because that's what's being incentivized inside of that culture. So you have these different people, they have different values, they have different ways that they would see leadership operating, and then they go and they attempt to activate that in the world somehow. They tend to like build an organization that follows that, and they hire people that are aligned with their values of this is how I think leadership should function. And you could have somebody come in and say like, well, you're doing it wrong. Well, maybe. But if you brought in your exact model that you think is the best one and you dropped it onto this organization, the people here might all feel completely out of place and they may all quit. And so, and some people say, well, that's fine. I'll bring in a bunch of people that I like and that like okay, cool. Just recognize you just completely shifted what that organization was. And so each individual, yes, every organization I've been in, people would admit that they could probably be doing better around what it means to create this structure, this leadership. How do we make that? Some of them probably had an idea of what they thought best was, but as long as there are different versions of best, as in that Steven Pinker example, well, we all just want the betterment of humanity. Yes, but what does that mean? And the reality is it differs person to person. And we have to be very careful when we go, well, mine is the best. That's what we should all be doing. Instead, you just recognize all these organizations are thinking about this, their leaders are thinking about this and applying it. I shouldn't even say thinking about it. Some of them don't think about it. Many do, some don't. It emerges organically from watching what is rewarded and punished within the organization. And that's one of the key things leaders do is they incentivize and disincentivize behavior through their action, through everything they say. Every time you show up to a meeting and you ask a question as a senior leader inside of an organization, you've caused people in that room to go, oh, a senior leader in our organization cares about whatever you just asked about. You didn't think you were creating an incentive, but you were. Every time you stay silent, you do the same thing. Every time you interject and say, wait a minute, I'm not sure I agree with that, or can you explain this to me, or whatever it is, you are telling people what's important. And this is something that human beings pick up on. Like we are very well wired to see leaders around us, to be a leader who has people following us, and to be like watching those dynamics and picking up on what's important, what's valuable, what's not. And we will start interacting in that way. We will start absorbing those sort of cultural norms. It's very rare to see somebody who's so, I'll say like disagreeable or, I'm thinking of like the Western, like the lone gunman sort of archetype, or just sort of this solo outlaw who doesn't care what anybody else thinks. That is a very rare archetype. And honestly, it's almost psychopathic. Because it's somebody you like to do that, you almost have to not have empathy. Just like, I got the things that I appreciate and like about the world, and I just pursue those things. And by the way, there's a lot more psychopaths in the world than people think, and they're not all bad. Like many of them are fine. So I don't mean to, there's some high functioning psychopaths and sociopaths out there that like do great. They're just normal people as far as anybody else is concerned. They could actually do that. For most of us, we are picking up on that. We are empathizing. We are having emotional responses. We're realizing, oh, that's what's important. Okay, that's not what's important. Okay, cool. This is what I'm going to focus so that I can succeed in the context that I'm in. So there's this ultimate question of what's best. We don't know. And then there's the more practical one, which is most of this emerges over time organically. It is rare to be able to have an organization that goes up and says, okay, what exactly do I want our culture to be? As we scale, what do we want our leadership structure to be? Okay, how is that going to work? And what about when we reach this level of people and this number of people and this number of people? A credit to Riot, they actually did a lot more of that than most organizations do early on in case they did start to grow. But even they, very rapidly as they were scaling, reached points where it was like, well, we weren't ready for this. We went from 50 to 300 to 3,000, and how should we structure leadership? How do we think about this? And a lot of it starts emerging organically. And by the way, I would argue that even if you did try to think all the way through, you're a startup with 2 other people, what will it be like when there's 10,000 of us making 20 games at the same time, or whatever it is, like whatever your dream is for your company? You're totally wrong and you don't know where. And so you're going to have to realize that as more people come into the org and the culture adjusts to them, and you try to bring them on board with the culture and hopefully hire them in a way that they appreciate the culture that's there and continue to propagate that. But you're going to realize like, oh, that thing we thought would work about like that clever way we were going to do leadership didn't actually work. Well, now what do we do? Well, we come up with something. And again, people are going to be self-organizing around that, whether you realize it or not. You can create the perfect, like most structured thing in the world. People are still going to be self-organizing within it. Humans naturally self-organize to their benefit and to the benefit of the things they value, which hopefully are the goals and the success of the team. But create a toxic organization, they're self-organizing entirely for their own self-interest because that's what they have to protect. So anyway, sorry, I said a lot of things there.
No, that was great. You mentioned, I wanted to touch on, it kind of sounds like a lot of leadership in big companies is you're driving the train and you're also kind of laying the tracks in front of the train at the same time. And the further down the path you can lay the tracks, kind of the simpler it'll be to transition. But sometimes companies like Riot, Blizzard, they grow so immensely, so quickly that you're just trying to lay these tracks down as the train goes. And so to what extent can you think ahead as a leader in terms of how your company will be? Because that is such a hard thing to do, is to imagine where we will be and also to deal with what is often the old guard of a company. Like there are kind of old lieutenants, people that have been there for a decade, that have been there from the first day, that kind of have maybe grown into leadership positions themselves, that may see the company in a static way in their mind. And then new people coming in like yourself are saying, actually, if we're going to get another 5,000 people join this organization in the next 5 years, we got to be ready to be different. And there comes the clash. So how do you think ahead when you have so many contrasting kind of people who have different ideas, like you said, with different models of leadership or just how the company should operate? It's a cluster.
So I think you should spend time as the senior leadership group of any reasonably scaled organization, right? Once you get past, let's say 20, 30 people, and it doesn't have to be an immense amount of time, going, what is it that we really want this organization to value? And I a lot of times this becomes like these little cultural bullets that people put on their website or whatever. And that's fine. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. But really, it's like, wait a minute, what do we think is important about why we're successful to this point, or how we believe we're going to be successful if we haven't been yet? What elements of that do we really want to carry forward? Some of it is going to shift, and we have to all recognize that. But what is it that we hold as core to what makes our company unique? Riot, it was pretty easy. We were rioters, right? What is it that we think is an ideal persona of a rioter? And how do we help people understand that when they get here so that they don't start running in different directions that are counter to what we value? You have to also recognize that when you do this, it is a incomplete picture, and again, will be wrong. Because you're not going to be able to perfectly anticipate. But if you're roughly on the same page, a phrase that stuck with me from a man, I knew him as Captain and then Major Chambers, and he was one of my teachers in ROTC. He said, a plan is a common basis for change. We all know that no plan survives first contact with the enemy in the military. And you plan very differently when you're stateside and you're going, okay, what's going to be a range day? When are we going to go do this work? When are we going to do, okay, we're going to do the PT test on this day. And you have a pretty high confidence that what you plan is going to roughly happen. When you deploy, there's an opposing force, and that opposing force gets a voice. And so you had a plan, and we're supposed to go 2 miles here, and we're going to link up with this other unit, and then we're going to go and basically make sure this village is safe or something like that, let's say, right? And while we're going 2 miles to link up, we get attacked. The plan is gone, and yet we all know that our goal is still to help this other unit protect that village or make sure that village is safe. And there might be some reason for that. So what do? Well, we communicate out, hey, plans are now changing. But the fact that we all knew what the plan was, maybe that other unit says, well, we still want to keep this village safe, but we also want to help our unit that was going to help us do that. Maybe rather than us waiting for them and then going to the village and we'll just wait while they're in a big fight, maybe we go help them get out of their fight. And then we can continue on to the village. And it's going to take us longer because combat takes a long time, way longer than you think, and way shorter than you think, depending on your frame. But you're going to end up in that village and hopefully making it safe. Or do you go, shoot, we're not going to make it. They're not going to make it because they're going to come help us. So we need to send somebody else to go make sure that village is safe. And so you ladder this stuff up. And so the plan is common basis for change in the context of what is our culture, what's our values, what do we think is important, who is this ideal persona of that we want to bring in, recognizing that we don't want to also create someone called it cultural inbreeding, where we all end up so similar that we don't realize our own blind spots. So you want some variety of, you want a diverse set of perspectives inside of your organization, but simultaneously you want those people to not feel horrible operating in that organization. And there are organizations that are like perfect for one person, horrible for someone else. So you're trying to find people that will work inside of your organization that do provide diverse perspectives inside of that space, but also agree broadly with the frames that you're operating within. And so you're trying to balance all this stuff. And you're saying, okay, here's how we'll try to plan this out. That idea of like laying the tracks before you as you go. You want to, it's almost like you want there to be a light way in which you've said, here's where I think the tracks are going to go. And then as we get to them, we're laying the tracks, and maybe we can get a little bit ahead of ourselves, but we want to be careful because I mean, this just applies to all planning and game development, generally speaking. It's not going to go the way you expected. And so if you've done too much work laying a bunch of tracks, odds are you're going to waste a bunch of time, or you're going to get stubborn and you're going to overcommit to a bad path, because all this, the system and the people within the system were telling you this is a bad way to go, but you're stuck on that because, well, we already laid that track, so that's it. Like sunk cost fallacy says we keep going this way. You can do that culturally. You can do that around the production of the game. You can do that in so many ways. So plan is common basis for change. What's the lightweight? It's that thing of, I say lightweight. What is the appropriate weight plan for the amount of change you are likely to experience inside of your system? And I think that's more lightweight than people realize, but still there to help people move in the same direction. In the absence of that, it actually does become quite chaotic. And one of the things you'll see lots of companies do is when they start scaling, they'll have this definition of who they are. They won't have laid any track or even like decided where the track will go. And then they go, oh, shoot, we're starting to grow faster than we thought because we've achieved some amount of success, perhaps. Sometimes it looks like funding rounds. Sometimes it looks like actual revenue. But they go, shoot, we better bring in people who know what to do. We better bring in people who have done this before, who have operated at mature companies so they can mature our company. This is one of the biggest problems I see, actually. It's not because those people that they're bringing in are wrong. It's because they don't know who they're trying to be. And so when these other people are brought in, they end up completely shifting that culture. And often the people that are there are like, well, now we don't fit here anymore because you brought in all these outside experts who have operated at mature companies and have already scaled before. And you've got to be careful because you'll lose what makes you special when you do that. But anyway, that's an anecdote of like something that goes wrong when you haven't actually done a little bit of sketching out, okay, this is what the future might hold. Can we all agree that this is a good idea? And when we bring people in, we can show this to them. And if they don't like it, they're probably not the right person.
Yeah, I was thinking the Mike Tyson quote, everyone's got a plan to get punched in the face.
That's right.
How good how good is the leadership apparatus? How good is the leadership apparatus at operating in that uncertainty and to react in a way that kind of respects the values? So I thought that really resonated with me, along with the whole answer. One thing I was kind of looking at is what happens when in an organization you have so many different layers. You often have kind of the games team, you have the studio, you have maybe corporate, and within corporate that's split between different leaders, and then oftentimes you might have a board. How does, when you talk about values, how does that kind of bleed down into the organization in a way where everyone understands what they're doing? And in product management, we talk a lot about objectives and key results, and this idea that there's a great example of a sports team where if the number one goal is to fill up the stadium with all the seats so we can obviously kind of make money for the team, then it bleeds down into what does the offensive kind of coach do? What does the marketing team do? And then falling down that pyramid, then what do the players have to do? Well, their objective is we need to get this amount of, I can't remember I'm not a big American football fan, like in the sense that I've played it when I was young, but I'm butchering for sure the words, but we have to get 9 yards every play, which means this is the result. We'll win X amount of games. How do you come up with, because everyone's really good at talking about objectives and key results, but I think it's one of the hardest things to do, where everyone in that chain of that organization, from the very top of the shareholders, the CEO, the executives, all the way down to the games teams themselves, they're all operating in an aligned value, an aligned vision. And that's so important because people get quickly jaded when they see
Mm-hmm.
that things aren't what they seem. How does that work? How do people actually accomplish that? Because I think the best organizations in the world, the ones that really run the test of time, have that really down to a T, where you join an organization and you know what you're doing and you know what you stand for and you know how your work translates. And yet the organizations that struggle don't have that, or just flounder that after a while.
So I would actually frame it a little differently. I think that the absence of that doesn't mean you're guaranteed to fail. But like so many other things, to have it is to stack the odds in your favor. And that's what you're trying to do over and over and over again. There are plenty of companies out there that didn't have what you just described, that didn't have this sort of, we're all moving in the same direction. This is who we are. This is what we want to become. This is the impact we're trying to have on the world. Let's run towards that. And yet they created a really resonant product. And that product got huge. And then they had to like figure it out as they went. And sometimes they did a horrible job of that. But they were printing money because they had this product and no one else produced a better product. And they just kept working on that product and trying to make it better and better and better. And you get into, innovator's dilemma, sustainer versus disruptive innovation and things like that. That can end up like taking those companies offline, and often does. But if you want to stack the odds in your favor, this is that thing of, hey, well, there are companies out there that haven't really had any formal leadership or good leadership or anything, and yet they've still succeeded. Why? Well, because everybody's got a shot. If you clunkily put together some app that everybody loves, or put together a game that wasn't what anybody was intending, but it happened to just land with players in just the right way, you can be a highly successful company and not have thought about any of this and not have any of this figured out and actually be doing a bunch. And by the way, interestingly, you'll have just learned all the wrong lessons. Because you'll think like, oh, this is what success looks like, which is one of the reasons that Graham McAllister did more study on this. He's someone who thinks about vision and game dev. The chances of you succeeding are negatively impacted if you've just succeeded. And the speculation as to why is that you tend to think, well, the things we did were why we succeeded. But the problem is the equation is too complicated. And so you're going to try to replicate what came before, and that succeeded then to that audience in that context. But if you try to do that again, you're not likely to. In fact, the fact that you think you know the cookbook, like the recipe for how to succeed, is actually going to hurt you because you're going to be a little bit stuck on why you succeeded last time, and it's going to impact you in a negative way in being able to adjust to the fact that this time is different.
So it's like those early startups. Sorry if I cut you off. It's like those early startups that I think the point I was trying to make is that they're so aligned to grow the company, to get X amount of revenue, to hit this amount of installs or this amount of players playing live. And so when they're growing very quickly, everyone's super aligned to the goal. Everyone understands what they're doing. Mm-hmm. Everyone understands what it's about. People are working harder. People are communicating more because they want to hit that goal. And then when these companies kind of mature and maybe get bought by a larger company, and all of a sudden, well, I'm not really sure what we're trying to do. We're just trying to keep this game afloat. We're trying to grow it. Maybe it's a cash cow. That's slowly when the values start going away, because it's almost like we need that need to survive as humans. Like we all collectively come together to achieve this thing, which is like in startups or like a young Riot Games, for instance, or a young Blizzard, everyone's just burning the midnight oil to get stuff to happen. And then once that kind of magic goes away, that's when the real need for leadership comes through, because the mistake is, well, when we were in our growth stage, we were killing it. And it was probably because of this leadership structure or the way the CEO or the founder was running the company. It was like, well, no, you were achieving it because everyone was fighting to survive, to make this game the best it can be. And then once that fire's gone, then there's the mystery, or perhaps the void of what is it that we're exactly trying to do.
Well, and how do you continue to set a vision that is compelling for the people that work for you? And also, I know some people believe that some people are just better at the early stuff and not so good at the late stuff. And I'm part way there. I think it comes down to, can you create a compelling vision for someone at any size? And when you're small, it's much easier to create a compelling vision. And to your point, survival is on the line. This is how I get paid. I'm working really hard. If you're working for Microsoft, while you might get laid off, as has tragically happened recently in game dev multiple times, broadly, like you're working a job, the company's stable, you're probably relatively stable, and you get to continue working. And so you show up, you do your thing. Survival doesn't feel like it's on the line. You feel like, hey, I'm going to keep getting a paycheck. And the fact that I've worked at Microsoft also looks good for if I were to go out into the world. So I feel somewhat secure in my career. And I don't have to, and actually perhaps shouldn't, because we're now in steady state. So burning the midnight oil over long periods of time like that is actually counterproductive. That's pretty well studied as well. So you're sitting there and you're going like, okay, what does it mean for me to be a steady state high performance operator? And the reality is most of those big organizations have very little ability to understand who is a high performer and who is not. They think they do, but the problem is they really don't know who their high performers are. And this leads to a problem of, okay, so I've got a bunch of people. Some of them might be high performers, some of them not. I'm not really sure who. I'm trying to figure out my performance management stuff and all this different stuff. And like you said, different set of problems emerge. These aren't fun problems. These aren't like exciting stuff. But this is a huge company employing a ton of people and hopefully bringing lots of value out there into the world. Like you can say what you want about Jeff Bezos. Most people in the United States have bought something on Amazon and do so regularly. And AWS solved a huge problem in terms of cloud service provider. Other people are doing some of the same things in both spaces, but like there's value that has been added into the ecosystem. And yet Amazon is now a giant, I can't remember. I looked up like how big it was. It's absolutely gigantic, the number of people in it. Do they have an aligned goal all the way up to the top that goes all the way down that organization? So you've got a couple of things you can do. One, you can try to keep your organization small. Great example of this in games, I think, is Valve. Kept itself fairly small. Also didn't have much of a top level vision from what I can see from the outside and from talking to some of the people who've worked there, other than, look, we're trying to, we have a set of values in terms of how we want to view players, but we're trying to make money via the context of gaming. And that could be platforms, that could be hardware, that could be games we make, but that's what we're doing. We're going to do those things. And there's a lot of self-organization and self-direction inside of that structure, and there's not that many of them. And so we have a lightweight, high-level goal. We're all able to point towards it, and then a lot of different stuff happens within that. And, some people have very high opinions of that culture, and some people have lower opinions of that culture as you get anywhere, because not everybody's optimized to every culture. But if you're like a Riot and you decided, okay, we're going to go the scale route, well, now you're correct. Like, okay, what do we do when it is a steady state thing? How do the entire company was so small when this game shipped, and now hundreds of people are involved in running each of the games that are successful out there, or at least League of Legends, right? And that size has shifted over time. Like, what are we doing with all these people? Well, they're working. They're doing steady work to create value for the players that still love to play that experience. And we're updating it, and we're making new champions, and we're, creating new modes, and we've got new skins coming out, and like all this different stuff. And can you make that exciting? And for some people, I think the answer might just be no. I want to go back to doing the thing where there were 5 of us in someone's basement, and we're all in it. And if it works, it works. And if it doesn't, well, we're all going to sacrifice things in the rest of our lives because this is meaningful to me. Sometimes you can have those people continue on in an organization. Oftentimes they'll leave because, again, the culture shifts, how leaders behave shift, all these different things. And I think you can continue to try to create compelling visions. And I think that's what often gets lost, is what would it look like to create something that was inspiring for the people who work here? To be fair, many companies put massive effort into this and aren't successful. And often that's because there's a difference between the explicit and the implicit culture of an organization. The explicit is what we say, yes, and the implicit is how we behave. And when you show up to an organization, you might know the explicit, and then you start realizing, like a simple example that I like to use is the open door policy of many leaders. Leaders have an open door policy. Great. So I can just at any time go in and talk to them when they've got their open door. Okay, great. So I go in and I say like, hey, I'm not sure we're doing this right. I'm not sure we're doing this right. I'm not sure we're doing this right. Everybody else knows somebody went and took advantage of the open door policy. What a wonderful thing we had. And then we discover later that person didn't get promoted and got viewed negatively by the senior leadership of the organization because they brought up a bunch of things that no one wanted to hear about. And that leader, talked to everybody else about how they were kind of an idiot and didn't have good ideas. And so this person, by taking advantage of the open door policy, which was an explicit cultural thing, ended up hurting their own career and struggling from that point forward. Everybody saw that to some degree or another, because that's happening a lot over time. When I see that, I realize, got it. Open door policy. I'm not going to take advantage of that. I'm definitely not walking through that. So they can have that door open all day. I'm not walking into that until I'm ready to get fired. And that's actually where I've seen that at the extreme end. It's like the time where I'm going to be honest with you is right before I leave.
I think that's one of the saddest things, because you're killing innovation, and the reason innovation is dying is because of this individualistic protectionism that happens at a leadership level. And it doesn't have to be the very top. It could be like mid-level managers. It could even be kind of managers on the team. They're trying to protect kind of they're trying to protect their craft, their perspective on things, and everything is perspective in a company. It's not so much the value. It's like what is perceived by others, because if you're an executive and you're looking into games teams, you're reporting to the managers that are then telling you what's happening. Often I see in many companies just a regurgitation of what's being done, like almost like a game of Chinese whispers where everything goes through a particular filter. And that breaks my heart, because I can speak personally for myself. I'm someone who loves to kind of talk about vision. Like, what are we doing here? What is this all about? How do I bring everyone together to motivate the best work and to deliver for something that matters? And when you start seeing people either get silenced or kind of just companies who are clearly late to an innovation or late to a certain product, because my guess is often there's a lot of protectionism going on. It's a very sad state of affairs, because we're all here to, especially in games, we're all here to build great games for players. And oftentimes the way we are successful is in doing that, solely that. Like if your game is great and players love it, they will buy it and you will make money. And
but you've just made an assumption though. And I broadly agree with your assumption. I think it's a good assumption, which is to say that people in game dev want to make great games that players love. That's why we're doing this. Simultaneously, we have to recognize there are also people that are in games that are interested in making money as an investment. There are also people in games, and this one's less nefarious is too strong a word, but less misaligned, but still present, who view the particular bits of the game that they build as actually more important than the game itself. So, Pete Cooper, one of the best artists I ever worked with, very willing to disagree, and we disagreed a lot. He was an awesome dude. I enjoyed working with him. One of the things he said that I've regurgitated a couple of times elsewhere, but I'm quoting from him: "I am a game developer, not an artist." He was saying the first thing I'm trying to do, and the first thing I encourage, because he was managing a lot of people, the first thing I'm encouraging them to do is we are game developers. We are making a game first. Your art comes second. That meant your CV and portfolio and all these different things. That's less important. Did you make a game or a part of a game that players loved? That's what matters. He was trying to reinforce that. That was very aligned with the Riot frame. But there are absolutely people out there who are going, I do art, and I get paid for it in video games. That's great. I am more interested in my craft, in the artist side of this, than I am in the game. And again, it's a misalignment in my opinion. And it makes sense why. Because if this company closes up, this game dev shop closes up, all I'll have is my work.
Yeah.
And if, the best way for us all to get hired again is to make the most successful game ever, but this is a low odds game. So if I do a bunch of crappy work, like a bunch of rough prototype that no one's going to appreciate, and I spend all my time doing that, and I get really good at it, and then we all end up closing up shop because we ran out of money and didn't find an audience. And now I go out and I say, hey, I'm a great artist. And they look and they go, I'm looking at your work. It doesn't seem that great.
Yeah.
So to your point, at many levels, not just at the senior level, everybody's dealing with the idea of protectionism. I'm balancing my self-interest with the interests of the organization, with the interests of the player. This is one of the key things leaders need to do. Leaders, I say influencing others towards a goal, but there's really a set of goals. And we're trying to align serving the audience with serving the team, with serving the organization. The thing we need to serve last is ourselves, if we're going to do this, I think, as best we can as leaders. But we're trying to bring all this together, and there will be conflicts here. there will be times where we ask someone, hey, I hate crunch. We have a huge problem. It's on live. I would like us to stay late tonight and potentially work Saturday to get this resolved because it's impacting hundreds of thousands or dozens of millions of players. And people on that team might go, yeah, we're aligned. We're going to be here until we get this thing resolved. And you can look at that and say, oh my gosh, you just asked your team to crunch like you mean person. It's like, no, we agreed because we valued the audience of the game we're making, and we were all aligned that that was something we're willing to sacrifice ourselves. Now, that can become a toxic pattern, and often does when startups who are used to burning the candle at both ends in the middle start growing and start relying on the heroics of individuals to carry them through rather than building systems now that they have the capacity to do so that they shouldn't have to do that, right? Like one of the ways you avoid that is by, better release pipelines, CI/CD and automated testing frameworks, like better release and build processes, basically, that mean that we are not likely to put something onto live that causes a bunch of pain to players, that causes individuals on our team to have to burn the midnight oil over and over and over, because you can't do that indefinitely. You will burn out your people. They will crack over time. If you've ever seen someone who like literally just has like a psychological break while working in game development, it's unfortunately not that uncommon. And it's, they need time away. You've pushed them to a point where they're no longer effective, and actually you've harmed them. And so you're trying to balance all this stuff, but that's like, hey, we have to solve this problem for the player. What if we just always do that? Well, we have to solve the problem. We have to solve the problem. Okay, cool. You're burning out your team. They're going to quit. They're going to break. And so as a leader, you're trying to balance that. And so everybody's doing this. Everybody's doing their own version of what is in my interest, what is in the company's interest, what is in the player's interest, what do I care about the most? How do I balance this within my own life? Every individual on your team, whether they know it or not, is walking through some version of that subconsciously, unconsciously, intuitively, as they try to figure out, what am I doing today? And you as a leader, one of the things that I think you're trying to do with this idea of how do we align people to a shared vision is how do you create something that's compelling for them that aligns their self-interest with the interests of the organization and the interests of the player. When I see, you were talking about objectives and OKRs and things like that, like how do we get all these, why do these end up, like everybody can talk about them, but it's really hard to, I think one of the tragic things that often ends up happening is senior leaders inside of organizations end up with subtly different or sometimes dramatically different versions of what success looks like. And they've sent that up to the board or whatever, or like the C-level, the VPs and CXOs. And now they've basically said, this is how I want you to evaluate me. But they all sent up a different stack because they all own different parts of the organization. What do we do when I go, well, in order for me to have the best chance of advancement, which I think I'm pretty good, most people tend to think like I'm doing a good job, generally speaking, I want to have a greater impact on the organization, so I need to make sure I continue to look capable and competent in whatever I'm doing. I just said I was going to hit these metrics along these lines or whatever else, and now that conflicts with somebody else's set of OKRs in a different part of the organization. Just immediately you have a misalignment, again, could be subtle, could be dramatic, where I'm now going to pull the resources and influence I have towards the completion of my goals so that I can do the right thing because I believe I'm a positive impact on this company and I would like to get promoted so I can have broader impact and have do even more good stuff for everybody. But now I'm actually misaligned, and now I'm actually in a fight. And now we're arguing with each other and we're not sharing resources and we're not helping each other succeed collectively because I've got my goals and metrics to chase and you've got yours, and we're both held accountable by a layer above us that perhaps isn't doing a good job of creating the shared meaningful vision. One of the coolest things, I knew a woman named Jessica Num. I partnered with her when I was doing a team of teams stuff inside of League of Legends. She was a great sort of a generalist leader, producer, product thinker. Product manager, I think, that was her official title. And something that I so appreciated that Riot and League of Legends, really the organization of League of Legends, allowed was she had goals she was supposed to achieve. And I showed up and I like she'd been there a while and I showed up and I found out that she handed off some of our absolute top engineering talent to other teams in the company, like people that were crucial to our hitting our local goals successfully. And I was like, what are you doing? Like, we can't keep giving away all of some of our best engineers, like seriously capable engineers. And there weren't that many. I rarely ran into a dud engineer at Riot, but like these people were like top engineers. And she'd hand them away. She'd be like, oh, go help them solve that problem. And it was like, why are you doing that? And she was like, because that's the more important thing for League of Legends right now. And League of Legends is more important than my team of teams. And such a credit to her, to I think Joe Tung, who was the basically the executive producer of League at the time, to have set up an organization where she could fail in her local goal, but be praised for helping the more important goals succeed. How often do you see that inside of organizations? I think it's very rare. I think once you start having the bifurcation of like the fracturing of organizations into different leaders, you start seeing things like empire building. You start seeing things like protectionism around like, I want the organization to support me, making sure that I succeed, and I will twist and contort things so that I do, so that I can go up to the next level and hopefully have a more positive impact. And the reason I constantly say to have a more positive impact, I think there's a mistake a lot of people make, that politics somehow emerges from malicious or nefarious intention, that immorality is the reason this exists. Most of the time, I think these are well-intentioned people trying to do the best they can, and they are dealing with their own set of incentives that are counterproductive to each other inside of the structure. Unfortunately, once that replicates over an organization, now we have a lot of different people fighting instead of working together to solve something. And so you have that cascade where we should be like, again, the leader is influencing others towards the goal, so we have to know what the goal is, and then we have to influence others towards it. Well, guess what? Now we've got a bunch of different goals, and we're all trying to play influence, and we're all probably pretty good at it if we've gotten fairly senior in an organization. So now we're actually like playing massive politics games with each other, and we all think we're doing the right thing. And I could easily say to the layer above, and it's your job to set the single goal, and to some extent it is. But also they have to deal with the fact that I've got really high-powered people who I want to empower. And if I'm constantly like saying, no, that's not the goal. No, that's not the goal. Like it's this. Yes, you want to be doing that. And I think leaders need to take more time. They need to spend more time projecting that through an organization than they do. But I also understand why they go, I hired a bunch of really smart people. I hired a bunch of capable leaders. I want to let them work. I don't want to constantly be getting into their business because I don't want to be a micromanager. I've learned that over time. So you're trying to, this so nuanced, all the balancing you're trying to do at every layer of the org. And of course, your CEO isn't the top because there's the board, right? And the board isn't the top because they're part of VCs or investment funds that have their own like LPs or like, you keep walking up the chain and everybody's got a driver. And the problem is to try to align so many things simply. I have a lot of empathy for the people in that position because it's so much more difficult than it seems when you're like a leader of a team or on a few teams and you're going, okay, this is what we're trying to do together, 5 people or 30 people or 50 people. This is where we're trying to go. This is what's important. Even when there's 50 people, even when there's 30 people in a couple of different teams, you already typically have conversations about, could we get that engineer on our team because they could really help us move faster on our goal? And somebody going, okay, wait, what? Okay, yep, that would be helpful. That would be good, but that would slow down this team. What's the cost of that? How does that relate to the overall goals we have? So often we're so busy, we're not thinking about this stuff. And I'm off on again, totally different tangent, but that is why one of the things I encourage leaders to do, regardless of where they are in the organization, are you giving yourself time during the week to stop and sit and think, what is the goal or goals you are trying to influence others towards? And how are you doing that? And are they in the right order? How do they align or not align with those around you, your peer leaders? And how could you bring that more into the same broad space? Because you can't avoid some amount of misalignment. Alignment isn't a constant state of entropy. It's always decaying. Your job is to kind of bring it back, constantly be correcting it to bring it back. Perfection is not the goal. That will take infinite time. You'll all just spend all your days in meetings. Don't do that. but figure out if you can get closer and figure out how to cascade that down through your organization. And that's hard. It's really hard.
I think what you explained so well is how people will descend into Machiavellianism, not because they're bad people or they have protectionist concerns or they're trying to get a promotion, but because that's what they've observed from others that works, especially in an organization that slowly becomes toxic.
Yes.
And I also really like the point where we should have empathy for our leaders, because often they're trying to juggle either, the Bob Dylan song, you got to serve somebody, everyone's serving somebody. It's that everyone's got someone else that they're reporting to, and very rarely is one in absolute power. So you kind of imagine the benevolent king that listens to all the subjects and comes up to a decision, has a royal court, and everyone's there listening. And I kind of romanticize that scene because that kind of brings the people together, right? You're sitting in the king's chamber and you're listening to kind of him slug it out with a peasant over some farmland, or maybe two peasants. And you as a bystander, you're like, oh, great. So there is a system. So there is some kind of fairness and I get exposed to it. And I think in organizations, especially the remote ones, that whole transparency disappears. And so all of a sudden what you're left with is just you're left with an opportunity to be like, okay, do I roll up my sleeves and play the game? Do I do what others are doing that's making them succeed? And that often is kind of helping. How do I frame this? Because on one side, you want to help your managers. You want to work for them and you want to help them do their best work. On the other, though, if you're noticing that others are getting ahead of you and it might not be exactly what you thought was the way to grow in that company, then all of a sudden you're left in a position which is, I want to grow too. How do I get there? And sometimes it involves people doing crazy things or taking a gamble or going straight to the CEO. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, you just went around the hierarchy. What have you done? And then you're kind of sitting there thinking, well, I kind of got pushed into this situation because I have no idea what's going on. I have no idea how these decisions are being played out. And that's so true. I don't think there's an answer to that. Like, I know there is, and I know that there's an idealist way of looking at it, but this is like, it's monkey behavior. We're all like working in a status system, trying to kind of get our resources. Like there are ideals which you're preaching, and then there's kind of like the reality of things, which is like when things hit the fan.
Yes.
How do we react?
And I like you said, when, not if, right? Because they're gonna hit the fan. And
of course.
There's oh man, I had something. Hang on, editor, save me. There's something I think about when I do systems design. I think this applies to many areas of life. Be careful about building a system based on ideal humans. Because again, I can preach the ideal or the generic, I think this is what we should do, I think this is what works. But the reality is that if your system requires better humans, you don't have access to those. You just have regular humans. You have regular people that have strengths and weaknesses and flaws and brilliance. And if your system is dependent upon perfect people, it will fail because you can't find them. No system predicated on perfect people will work unless, I believe in an afterlife. So I'm like, okay, maybe there, like in the times of heaven, then we can have our perfect systems. But this side of eternity, right? And if you believe in that or not, like we are stuck. We are stuck with people who are going to have to ponder their own self-interest for a ton of really good reasons. And by the way, even to assume that somebody's taking the time to do this sort of thinking exercise, you were just describing it. Oh, my boss is doing something silly. Okay. What's the culture of the organization? What's my relationship with my boss? What's my relationship with my boss's boss? How important is this? Who's negatively impacted? Can I go tell my boss, hey boss, I think you're doing something silly? Do I just get fired? Do they have that power? Is that the way the structure works? If I skip level them and go to their boss, say, I think my boss is doing something silly. Do they say, why didn't you talk to your boss about it? This is inappropriate. Do they fire me? it's very, very difficult. Riot had a frame around feedback. I keep coming back to Riot because it was a very formative experience. So Podster was like, I'm sick of hearing a Riot. Well, that's what I got. There's others too, but like that's the easiest one.
I think people want to hear Riot. I think people want to hear it.
Well, once I start getting consulting, I also have to sign a gajillion NDAs, and it's like it's a different story. But they had a feedback system. If you had a complaint about somebody and you heard somebody complaining about someone else and you were a leader, it was your job to bring that, to say, like, the phrase, the cheeky phrase, the question you would ask is, what did they say when you told them this? And often, for somebody especially who's new to the company who didn't realize this was the culture, they would say, oh, well, I haven't talked to, okay, cool. Don't talk to me about it anymore until you've talked to them. This is it's a good thing. And it is insufficiently complex. There's not enough nuance in that, because what if I have a problem with somebody who does have massive influence over my career? Am I just supposed to go tell them? Like, I tried that once. Didn't go super well for me. I was following the principle. I was following the value that we all espoused. But guess what? There are levels at which, hey, that's not going to go super well for you. And so I had to figure out how to give feedback to people that were senior to me, which was something, again, in the military I just didn't even worry about. In fact, avoided heavily. I had to learn how to give feedback, but then I had to be careful about the feedback I was giving. And if somebody had come to me when I, like, let's say later, once I learned all this, and they said, like, well, you just need to go tell that person what they're doing wrong. Like, hey, have you talked to them about this? I'm like, no. And they're like, well, you should. That's the right. I'm like, yeah, right. Like, I'm a little cynical about that value, perhaps, but actually there's a realism there that is, look, I get it. That's a strong ideal. And between peers and within a team, I think it makes a lot of sense. But if you want me to go tell, look at the extreme example, an angry VP of design or something, which that's not a real example, by the way. I actually had nothing but good interactions with Tom Cabell. I thought he was great. But like, if you had like an angry VP of design or something out there and you're like, I got to go tell him he's doing something, and I've got some problems with how he's operating. Someone's like, well, you need to go talk to him. No, be careful, because you could just get yourself fired. So we have to accept the nuance inside of this, that yes, there's the principle. Yes, there's the value we're trying to hold, which is when we have problems, we don't complain about people. We don't start gossiping about people. Simultaneously, what's the path? And is it, and this is one of the things, like, well, I guess you got to go to HR, and it's like, oh gosh, right? Anybody that's ever gone to HR is like, and by the way, I've known some amazing HR representatives, some amazing HR people, but they also are caught between conflicting there, and they are there to some extent to protect and serve the company, and they are there to protect and serve the employees of the company. What happens when they come into conflict? What are they incentivized to do? And so you like this, just it ladders up, down, sideways, everywhere. And most people aren't doing that work to think through, because it's just not part of their day. Like I'm a good designer. I don't want to have to like be trying to drive cultural change in the organization. And I think that's one of the things too, that when you become a leader, especially if you kind of got knighted because you were just really senior and really good at it, well, guess what? Now a huge portion of your job is establishing the goal and creating culture. Do you know how to do that? Are you trained for that? Do you know how to advocate for the people? Like, it's one of the things for managers. Managers sit also in the center point. All managers, they are the direct reports, view and representative to the rest of the company, and they are the rest of the company's view and representative to the direct report. Who do they serve first? Does the company know? Does each individual manager know? Have they thought about that? What happens when those things come into conflict? If you always just serve the company, then your direct report's not going to trust you. If you always just serve the direct report, the organization is not going to trust you. Yeah. What do? You try to thread that needle. You accept the nuance of that. Maybe you have a bias towards one or the other, and you accept the nuance of this. And so this is all happening. Like there's, and this is that whole thing. So much of this comes back to incentives, and I think one of the places I like to start is to go, okay, when I see a system, one, all companies are dysfunctional. It's just a matter of how much and in what ways, because we don't have the ideal system.
We're not perfect
people,
and
right?
Humans are imperfect.
So when I go in, I go, what are the incentives at play? Are there ways we could slowly or quickly sometimes try to shift incentives as leaders so that the right things are encouraged? And how do we accept that whatever we put out there, it's really hard for it? Like, there are very few values that are just infinitely useful. I think a almost like a oh man, I'm forgetting the word. There's a Greek word for love.
Amor?
Wow.
No.
There's 4 Greek words for love. Like there's storge, eros, phileo,
Oh, that was Latin.
and one more. And it's the one anyway. It's the love that is like the desire for the best for the other, and it's a selfless love. And
Is it
that is
agape?
Agape.
Yeah.
Agape. Yes. So agape love. So this idea of agape love, I think that's one of the few things in life that I believe that you can almost run to infinity if you look at it and say, like, this is an infinitely valuable, highest trait or value to aspire to. Because if you treat everyone with agape love, including yourself, and go like, okay, how do I behave in a way that is best, that is constantly the best for the people around me, and in the context of video games, that's like the player, that's the team I'm leading, that's the organization, and I do that, and this is, again, nuanced, complicated. I do that across time, so I do that from the short term to the medium term to the long term. In all these ways, I'm trying to balance all of this, and I'm trying to do what is best for the people around me based on what I know today, recognizing I know insufficient knowledge to do that perfectly, but that is what I strive for. And by the way, one of the things a lot of people say, well, like, with selfless love like this, aren't you going to forget yourself? It's like, no, because in the long term, if I neglect myself to such an extent that I can't serve others, I have not succeeded. I have not succeeded in serving them into the medium and long term. And so I think there's very few things like that. Like my top ones are something like love, courage, humility. I think there's a stack of those. And there's other things too, for me on the religious side, there's faith, but there's like hope. I think hope is something, you have to hope in something. You have to be able to keep hoping in something. But there's love, courage, and humility. And I think those you can almost run to the end, and they overlap and they work with each other. And I think leaders need to have these values. And then they need to go, okay, cool. That's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to be courageous without being prideful or egotistical or arrogant. And I'm doing both of those things in a way that is in the interests of those I lead, the audience I serve, the company I'm a part of, and lastly, myself, but again, not to the exclusion of myself. Otherwise, I won't be able to serve anybody else. And like when you look at it, all other values, I think, probably maybe not all, but many other values, you end up like in conflict with each other. And so there's this infinitely nuanced, complex scenario someone ends up in much more rapidly than they realized. As soon as you're a leader on a team, suddenly I am balancing so many more things than I probably thought I was thinking about, with, to the point I made earlier, very little training, very little understanding of this. And often a lot of poor examples or incomplete ideas about what it means to do this well. And then we wonder, like, well, why are organizations dysfunctional? Because these leaders that is who they are. At the bottom level, at every level, they're just people who have been in that situation and have slowly been promoted. And some of them are weird like me and love like going and studying and thinking and are just like trying to figure all this out and like, how can I do this the best? It doesn't make us better leaders necessarily, though. It just means maybe we know more stuff and we've read more books and we've done. But like, I guarantee you, I've met some leaders that hardly read anything about leadership and yet were phenomenally proficient at it because of experience. And this comes back to something you said earlier too. You can train someone to be a leader to some extent, but just because I understand how a piano works doesn't mean I can play the piano. And there is a part of this that is, you have to get reps doing it, and you have to realize just how hard it is to make sometimes the courageous, loving decision, and trying to figure out the moral framework around it. It's just it's crazy. It's hard.
It is.
And I think it's one of those things that it gives me a lot of empathy for everybody up the chain. Not because they're necessarily all doing that, because they've broken it down that exact same way, and maybe some of them are just selfish narcissists, desperate to advance their own careers and make a bunch of money or whatever. I don't know. I think it's easy to fall into the fundamental attribution error, which is I view other people through a simple lens of motivation while I view myself through a complex lens of motivation. Like, well, they did that because they're stupid or because they don't like me or because blah, blah, blah. You know, classic example of like someone cuts you off on the highway. And it's like, well, obviously they don't like me. And it's like, well, they might not have even seen you. They might have just missed you and changed lanes because that's happened. And by the way, odds are you might have done that at some point in your life without realizing it. And so maybe somebody else thought you were a stupid jerk who hated them. But if you did it, maybe there's sometime you have cut someone off and you're like, sorry, I really had to get over because I had to make this exit because my wife is pregnant and we're getting to the hospital. Like they don't know any of that. They don't have the context about your life. And so it's easy to simplify those leaders into, well, obviously they're doing this because they're selfish, egotistical narcissists, bent on world domination, whatever, right? Like, sure, you can have that frame. That simplifies your life. It makes your life a little bit easier because simplifications, like models of the world, make the world easier to understand and grasp.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, they only ever model reality. They do not replicate it. And so maybe your life gets a little easier as you have to think about it because you can just hate those people because they're obviously a bunch of jerks. But if you step back and you go like, okay, who are they? What do they care about? Suddenly life gets much more complicated again. And so, yeah, I try to, like, that's just one of those things. And by the way, I failed at this. Like one of my big failures was I think I didn't treat the leaders who were senior to me as human beings with interests and desires and goals and complex incentives and struggles. I just saw a bunch of people inside of an organization that were being hurt, that were like, look, you've got, 100 plus people here. They're hurting. And I can see the cause of that. Like one of the things people appreciated about what I did was I was good at like the systems thinking through of like what's going on here. And I said like, look, this is a problem and it's a leadership problem. But I did that in a very blunt and inhumane way towards the leaders involved. And for me, military background, I was like, look, if you're causing problems for all these people, you're the problem.
Yeah, the ends justify the means, right?
The ends justify the means. Very dangerous moral philosophy, similar to greatest good for the greatest number. Very dangerous moral philosophy. Yes. So anyway, there you go. More thoughts.
No, it's truly mind opening. Having empathy for leaders. I think I've personally made this mistake myself. In various parts of my career as kind of I'm growing. I'm 31, so I'm full of testosterone and I'm competitive and I want to grow. And like, I just kind of have to stop myself sometimes and be like, you got to chill out, man. Like, you're learning. And I always bring it back to just wanting to learn. But I wanted to point out one more duality in leadership, and only because I've recently, I think maybe a couple months ago, I finished reading the Blizzard book by Jason Schreier. And it goes through that duality between Mike Morhaime and Bobby Kotick. Both like brilliant leaders in their own respects. But I think Jason really draws an analogy between, or a comparison between Mike Morhaime, who would answer every single email of anyone that wrote to them and was visibly present playing the very games that Blizzard was releasing on stream or just there playing and trying them out. And then you have Bobby Kotick, who in every regard was a brilliant businessman, shot through the revenue of what Blizzard was and just made it grow into this massive company alongside Activision, or combined with Activision. But you have this duality of these two leaders who are both great, but at the end of the day, who is the leader that truly survives? Bobby Kotick. Not because I think that he's doing something wrong, but because the world we live in now, or I think the world's maybe always been this way, but we kind of want to see the gaming industry as kind of idealistic. Like, we're all here for the love of the players, for the love of the game. You have all these like vision statements from companies like EA, where like they're all kind of explicitly saying like we're all about the players. But at the end of the day, it's that balance sheet. It's that profit revenue, all that stuff. And that's the world we live in. How do you balance something like that when you have a leader like Mike Morhaime, which is so inspirational, so great for the team, but will only get so far, while Bobby Kotick will actually kind of move mountains and actually be able to kind of, he almost turned Overwatch into like the NFL. It didn't work out, right. But like that, it takes he tried. It takes a special caliber of person to like go out
to try that.
to try that, right? It's not for
Yeah.
everyone. And Mike Morhaime, on
Yeah.
the other hand, just was able to instill such an incredible culture around the Warcraft franchise and StarCraft and all that stuff. And those are two very different types of leaders that in some way work together as well.
So I do a leadership accelerator or coaching program where I try to bring leaders in. And one of the things I do, like the first week's just, hey, here's an intro. Who are you? You know, talk to me. It's a little bit basic stuff. Second week of this training is 16 weeks long. The first 4 weeks basically cover leadership, and then I go into some other topics for each of the in chunks of 4 weeks. And in the second one, I ask them about values. And it's not to tell them these are the values you should have. It's to say, do you know what your values are? One of the interesting things about values, if you know what your values are and you really hold them, to me, to be a person of integrity is to hold your values. And so in some sense, someone else might have a totally different set of values that I consider evil, but if they're operating consistently out of those values, they are a person of integrity. And this is tricky, right? Because like, okay, you know, I don't like that you're a person of integrity because your values suck, in my opinion. And again, you know, we figure out where the absolutes are there. But if you think about what your values are, and then you operate with integrity towards those values and trying to follow them as best you can and learn about them and modify them and take on new ones and realize that this one wasn't serving you or you had, you know, thought about it in the wrong way, it's going to shift because you're imperfect. To your point, you're always learning. As you keep doing that, as you walk down this path, you are going to hit moments where you are faced with, do I hold my values here and accept what may be a lesser outcome according to someone else's values? Or do I bend or break my values to get what would be a greater outcome according to someone else's values? So, Mike Morhaime, Bobby Kotick, I think if you were to break those two gentlemen down, what are the values you were trying to honor? What was most important to you? You would get very different answers. And what's interesting about this is I appreciate that you're kind of like, look, both of these are in some ways clearly effective leaders. That, you know, they're neither of these, like, these aren't idiots. You know, it's not like one of the, you know, I think that's one of the things that can often happen is you have a leader and they're doing stuff you don't like, and you're like, well, they're clearly an idiot. You know, there are some really bad leaders in history that have done some pretty awful things. But my goodness, the fact that they were very effective leaders was the reason they were able to do that.
Exactly.
And we should keep that in mind. So you have these two people who are effective leaders in their own way. What are you willing to do in order to achieve the outcome you're striving for within the context of your values? And because the values to some extent are like, they're directly related to your morality. They're directly related to what you think is right and wrong, to your ethical frame for the world. And if doing the right thing was easy, we wouldn't praise people who did it. It would just, like, and that's why, by the way, when it's easy to do the right thing, no one really cares that much. You know, there's I don't know, some trivial example of, like, you see somebody, let's say an older person who clearly has trouble walking, and they drop something. And you're walking past them. You stoop down and you pick up the thing they dropped and you hand it to them, or you put it, like, maybe you're in the grocery store parking lot or something. You can't put it in their cart or whatever, and they say thank you, and you say, yeah, you did a right thing. It didn't cost you much to do that. And so nobody, like, someone might have seen that, you know, if I was there with my daughters, I have a 3-year-old and 1-year-old, I might be like, that person did something good. Did you see that? They did something nice, right? It's a good example. They did the right thing, but it wasn't costly to them. And then, by the way, still do it, right? Do the right thing.
Of course, yeah.
But when the right thing is easy, we don't put that on billboards. We don't talk about that a lot. When the right thing is hard, we do. But sometimes it's the billboard saying, look at this jerk. Because, again, different views of what's right and wrong. And so when we have values, when we have a moral framework, when we have an ethical framework, it means that sometimes you're going to run into situations where to do the right thing is hard. And that is when it's most important to do the right thing. And other people who have a different framework for all of this are going to look at you doing the right thing and go, why are you getting in the way? Why are you slowing us down? Why are you being annoying? Why are you doing the wrong thing? And you're going to say, because this is what I believe is true.
Yeah, this is my right thing. Yeah.
This is my right thing. And, you know, I believe in an absolute standard for this, but I believe that humans' ability to understand absolute truth is very limited, if there at all. And so we're all left with a bunch of people. You as a leader need to know what you value, what your moral and ethical frameworks are, so that you can behave with integrity as you go about the world. And sometimes that may mean you don't get a promotion, you don't get a raise, you don't get the job you wanted, you didn't get the funding round that you thought you could get, but you just had to sacrifice, you had to bend your values a little bit, and you weren't willing to do that. And by the way, you're going to have to also navigate, because anytime you're interacting with other people, you are not going to have this 100% aligning. So someone else who's maybe like a co-founder is going to be like, no, we should totally do this. And you're going to be like, I don't think we should. And you're going to have to figure out, okay, is this important enough for me to say I'm absolutely not doing this? And if you insist on doing it as my co-founders in order to maximize our chance in this next funding round, then I have to leave. It's hard. It's hard to have values. It's hard to live by them. It's hard to accept the consequences that come with having values. And the alternative is to be tossed around. Well, what's expedient for me right now? The problem is when you play out expedience over time, you don't trust people that are always expedient. And you shouldn't. Because they could do anything at any point if they thought it was expedient to them. You know, it's that the whole point of the second week is actually to introduce the dichotomy of what does it mean to be a good leader. Some people mean effective, some people mean moral.
Yeah.
In my opinion, you need both. And the most dangerous is not the ineffective, immoral leader. It's the effective, immoral leader. That's the one that can really do damage. But you have to be thinking as a leader along both these axes. And how are you going to live out integrity and grow in both of these ways as you grow older and as you have more experience and as you lead? Like, it's tough, man. I mean, and I've seen leaders do the hard right thing that got them no credit from anybody, and sometimes got them punished. And I've seen leaders bend and break. One of the things that's interesting about all of it, what you practice, you become. So if you're someone who's always willing to bend or break what your values are, what your moral and ethical framework is, because, well, this time, I'll just, you know what, it's not that big a deal this time. Do that enough times, and guess what? You've just recreated a value, which is expediency. You've just recreated a value, and it is whatever was driving that. That is actually the practical value you're following. And so I think a lot of people, it's when people argue about like are white lies really bad? You know, a friend asks me, hey, I did something new with my hair. Did you notice? Did you like it? And you're like, no, I don't like it. But like they ask you very directly. And a lot of people would say, just say, yeah, it's fine. Yeah, good. Yeah, it looks nice or whatever. What if you don't like it? Should you lie? I think no. I think when you do those little things, when you sacrifice the little stuff, it's just a white lie. It doesn't hurt anybody. Nobody cares. Nobody's going to know. Like, you'll know, and you'll have started a habit. And if you keep doing that, it becomes a norm. And so how can you handle that in a different way? Well, that's harder. Yes, it is. But do you value honesty, transparency? All the things that you would say you value and you want other people to have as they interact with you, do you portray those as you interact with all of them? That's another way to kind of frame it. How do you want people to treat you? Is a hint of how you should be treating other people. It's not perfect, because everybody is different. You need to take into account the variance. But like broadly, there are people out there who want everybody to treat them a particular way and do not reciprocate that in the context of society. And like that's a big problem. That's somebody who's now like, oh, I have an expectation for you that I don't have for myself. Big problem as people go up leadership hierarchies.
No, please finish your thought.
Oh, it's just that idea of as you go up leaders, we think that there's a different set of rules that apply, because in some ways there sort of is. But man, like I think of myself again as a young leader, and I had ideas like, well, that would be beneath me. I'm a leader. and I've got my big head, and I'm not going to do that. And I look back, I'm like, gosh, Ben, you were just lazy, or you had this bad frame, but you expected other people to do it. You're not going to do it. You're not going to do that hard work. You're not going to stay late. You're not. That's for the peons. I'm in charge. And that's not how I ever would have said it to myself. I would have had a bunch of really, really good rationalizations, right? Higher IQ you are, better you are at rationalizing your own bad behavior. So there's all the smart people out there. Sorry, it's even harder for you, not easier. But that, it's so easy to get caught there and to have those different set of expectations and to actually not be living out what I believe my values, my ethics are, my morality. It's hard. It is hard. And people need to embrace that, and especially as a leader, because now as you fail, you set an example. If you fail to be a person of integrity, you now set an example that it's okay to not be a person of integrity. That'll just run through a leadership, like a senior leadership group like crazy. CEO, COO does something, breaks a rule, tries to cover it up, doesn't admit it, whatever. Oh, okay.
That's what you did.
That's acceptable behavior.
And I wanted to touch on a point. It's easy to hide from this stuff. In university, I studied sociology, and we looked at crowd dynamics.
Mm-hmm.
And in a riot, one of the reasons why a riot can get so out of hand is because all of a sudden the individual is now part of a crowd or of a collective, and thus the blame is spread out. And so no one is really responsible. The crowd is responsible. And I think that kind of blends in nicely or is analogous to how an organization or a company works. Because if I look away and I'm like, well, it's not really my decision. I'm part of the leadership team, but I'm just going to let them do it. It's not on me. It's on everyone. That's slowly how a culture can kind of get toxic over time. And you wake up the next morning and all of a sudden you're like, wow, what the hell happened? Well, it's no one was taking accountability. And one of the things I've noticed with players is whenever something goes wrong or we miss a delay, I like jumping on Reddit and telling players personally, like, hey, this is kind of what happened. This is what went down. I'm going to give you the most unfiltered version of things. I'll be a little bit technical. I'll explain you things that happened and kind of just very humanly explain what happened in this team and why we failed to release at this date. And every single time, players who maybe on the outside people would label as a toxic community or very maybe like patronizing or not very sensitive to the difficulties of what it means to develop games, et cetera, very demanding. They're all very happy to hear that. They just want to see some honesty. They want to see some accountability, some explanation. And 9 times out of 10, they're more than happy with the delay. Granted, you haven't taken any money from them for like some kind of like early release or whatever that is.
Sure.
And that I think is the savior for so many companies. And we tend to just kind of hide behind the crowd, send out like a statement. Here's like a PR statement. Here's a blog. Here's a community post. And no one really wants to get in front of the fire and say, you know what? I did this. My bad. I'm the leader of this team. This is kind of what happened. This is what we should have done better. I'm shocked how that doesn't happen enough. How it's almost I've found that I've grown a lot in my game community since I joined, and I found that a big part of that was just being honest with the players, just being honest with what's going on. Obviously, you can't say everything, but giving them that perspective, or just showing them that you're human and that things can go wrong, and that we're going to keep doing better and better. We're going to keep trying, and sometimes we can mess up. That's so powerful. Like I mean this almost in a selfish way. I'm like, why aren't we doing more of this? Because it does work. It's just human. Humans want to interact with humans. They don't want to interact with a corporation or for kind of business elements that are just looking for profit. They know that a lot of the people in there are just working to make great games and to make a great product for them, which keeps the whole wheel spinning because they'll pay for it and everyone's happy. Why isn't accountability a bigger thing? Why do people hide behind stuff?
So the couple things came to mind for me. One, you said like be honest, and I would say add to that don't lie, right? So if you can't say anything, don't say anything.
Yeah.
Don't say the wrong. Don't just be like I make up a story or just tell them the truth or don't say anything. Second, Brene Brown talks about vulnerability. Great stuff to read. I think it's very helpful for leaders. I can get semantic about some of her definitions, but broadly, like, her stuff is, I just really appreciate it. She talks a lot about vulnerability. And she calls out this contrast we have. When we think about ourselves being vulnerable, the very nature of being vulnerable implies exposure, weakness.
You can be harmed.
You can be harmed, right? Yeah, exactly. You are vulnerable. When we talk about someone else and say, yeah, they were really vulnerable about that, we generally don't mean they were weak. They were exposed. They could be harmed. Even though in some ways that's true. What we tend to mean when we say they were really vulnerable about that is we respect the fact that they were willing to be vulnerable because we recognize it took courage. When you go on and you talk about what happened, you are being vulnerable and you are making your organization vulnerable. And the reality that someone at some point did that and got flayed for it and even fired is real.
Yeah.
So there's a risk there. The problem is, knowing that risk, if you start overthinking what you're saying and start diplomatizing it and PR speaking it and trying to just figure out how to make it so that, like, I'm very sorry about what happened and I can take no responsibility nor the organization for anything, and we hope you indemnify us about, like, it's just like, I see these statements sometimes from companies and they're not real. They're not vulnerable. And I also have empathy for them because sometimes somebody's gone and said the real vulnerable thing and gotten axed. When you're in the organization that doesn't take accountability and you're the first person to try, you paint a huge target on your back. And there's this really simple calculus you can do, which is, well, gosh, if I stick my neck out and all that happens is I get my head chopped off, what good is that to the organization? Shouldn't I try to figure out how to play the game? Shouldn't I try to figure out how to build the right relationships so that I can stick my head out safely? There's a tangential, well, it's somewhat analogous example of people in the military. The military is, a huge organization. Like, I think the Army's, close to 2 million, or was at some point, like 1.7 million. I can't remember exactly if you look at all the different units. And they have a way they operate. They have standard operating procedures. They have guidelines for everything. They got field manuals. Like, it's a regimented, it's a military. It's a structured thing, hierarchy, rules, guidelines. It's all established. They don't want you messing up. Sometimes you see something that's broken when you're fairly junior in your career. Like, I'm a, doughy-eyed lieutenant, and I show up and I'm like, oh, that doesn't look like it's right. Now, one, there's a chance I'm just totally wrong. That, like, actually that works that way for a good reason, and you just don't understand it because you're a doughy-eyed lieutenant who doesn't know anything.
Yeah.
Sometimes that's true. In fact, often.
Very likely.
True.
Yeah, likely.
Very likely.
Yeah.
Sometimes I'm right. And that thing wouldn't have to be that way. There's a totally better way to do it. But I'm a lieutenant. There are 9 explicit, arguably 10 explicit ranks above me inside of this structure, and thousands of people. And for me to get to the higher ranks of this, I have to spend years inside of this organization. And to get to those higher ranks, especially, I have to figure out how to navigate this organization. I have to play politics. I have to build relationships. And it's important that I do, because if you can't do that, what in the world are you doing at those levels? If you are not able to have if you do not have a toolkit that allows you to influence things, what in the world are you doing at, like, an 08 general? But I see that problem as a second lieutenant. Turns out it's a real problem. I go, I'm going to try to fix that problem. The way I fix that problem is by spending 20 to 30 years in the Army. And then coming back to that problem. Who do I become on my path to becoming the person who can solve that. The grand irony is that in those 20 or 30 years since I become what I practice, by the time I get to the point where I probably could have changed that thing for the better, I have become the system. And now there's a second lieutenant showing up in the Army who looks at me and goes like, man, that policy that person put in place is dumb. And they're right. But I'm playing the game. And I've been playing the game for 20 to 30 years. I don't know when to stop. There was a really great, are you familiar with the show Brooklyn Nine-Nine?
Yeah, of course.
So Brooklyn Nine-Nine is a great show. There was a point where the captain is talking to Terry. And Terry's on his promotion board to lieutenant. And something happened that like Terry was basically falsely accused of being a criminal, essentially because he was black. And the captain says, you're going for your, and he's like, I want to submit a complaint about the officer that did this. It was inappropriate. And the captain goes, you shouldn't do it. You want to be a lieutenant. You want to become a lieutenant. Terry's like, should I do it? Should I not do it? Should I do it? Should I not do it? And I actually think, it's funny, comedy sometimes just has these deep truths expressed in them. But the captain, who's also black, Captain Holt, he ends up coming back towards the end of the episode and he says, I realized that for my whole career, I pushed that stuff down so that someday I could make a positive impact. And I realized that, like, what am I doing? I'm now at this point in my career and I've never actually pushed back to have that positive. It doesn't mean he didn't think he was doing a good job all along or anything like that, but really just try to solve the problems inside of the system. And so he said, you should send the complaint. And I loved it too. Terry didn't end up getting selected to the promotion board, and they'll never know, was it because I submitted this complaint and it ruffled someone's feathers and people didn't like it? You'll never know. But if I always wait to do the right thing until I have more power and am more safe and have better relationships and have more influence and whatever, there's a decent chance you just never do. And so what's the point? What's your break point? Again, coming back to that idea of like your values and principles, because I think it is important. As again, everything is nuanced. Everything is too complex.
Yeah.
Because there is a point where you probably should bend, maybe a point where you should break, depending on what's involved. But really, break, maybe not. Maybe that's where you quit instead. But there's probably a point where you should bend, where you should go like, okay, I can accept that even though it's not perfectly in line with me, because I'm not alone. I am in a collective group, and like other leaders are like, no, this is the right thing to do. And when is that abdicating responsibility and not taking accountability versus going like, okay, I'm making the best choice in the interests of the group, versus when do I say, that's it, it's time to have the positive impact or to try. And if I fail, I fail.
So for any young leader listening, yeah, I know that we've said it, there is nuanced, and I absolutely agree. And this is something I'm grappling in my own career as I kind of progress. And I have aspirations to maybe be a leader or work into leadership. I mean, as a product manager, you have that kind of in the role already, but how do you balance playing the game with kind of respecting the integrity of your values, or at least having integrity in those values, and maybe not playing the game as much, but you're taking that risk. And on top of this is a bit of a loaded question, but how do you navigate what seems to be a minefield where only 1 out of 100 people actually end up getting to the top spot, right? Like if you want to get to the top spot, that is a combination of playing the game, but also breaking the game and going around kind of the hierarchy.
Yeah.
And maybe it's an impossible question to answer, but what is the nuance here for someone, let's say my age, or maybe late 20s, early 30s, maybe even late 30s, whenever it is, but anyone who's trying to break into leadership or get to a higher level, they're grappling with this question. Do I play the game and spend my whole life getting to the top to then just become part of the system? Or do I try to expedite it a bit and kind of speed it up because we're only on this earth once, right?
I think it's somewhat related to what you just said. We're only on this earth once. What does winning mean? Does your win state relate to your values and your moral and ethical framework? Um, two examples from my own life. When I became, I think this has shifted for me a little bit now, but when I became senior at Riot, people asked, oh, the next promotion was lead. When I first became senior, they were like, oh yeah, when are you going to get lead, Ben? They were kind of joking. And I was like, I don't think I am. I look at what the leads are doing and I don't want to do that. And it wasn't because they were doing anything immoral. It was just like a lot of work I didn't want to do, but also I felt like it was being shoved into these situations where, the promotion for the sake of promotion, this promotion because that's the clear path, was not actually my path. And so I think a lot of times people want to be promoted to the next thing, not because they actually want to, but because society tells them they're supposed to be, because that's the path to money or prestige or influence or whatever it is. You know, you want to be respected. Heck, you want to have a good, you know, you want to attract a high quality spouse or something. Like, you got to really be the most amazing person you can be in whatever ways that means. What does it mean to look at success through the lens of your values and morals? And to do that, you have to actually pause and go, what are my values and morals? Where would I be comfortable bending? And I think, you know, you don't have to look at it as like if I was that junior leader, pause for a second and write down what are the leadership traits you want to best exhibit in your career. What are the ones you struggle with right now, or you're worried you're going to struggle with? As we've talked through this conversation and captured all this nuance, where are you likely to fall prey to your own darker side?
Of course, which we all have, the shadow.
Right, the shadow. For me, I struggle when people don't view me as competent. I want to be viewed very much as competent. I very much value being viewed as competent. This leads to all kinds of weird behaviors. One of them is if I don't know something and somebody asks me a question or says something, I will pretend I know it. And then in my head, I'm pretty fast. I can rationalize why. Oh, okay, cool. I think in context, that probably means this, and I won't ask a question.
Yeah.
I still fight this to this day. I've been dealing with this for like 10 years since I really recognized this was a problem in myself. Why don't I just say, hey, what does that acronym mean? But what if, Ben, they're like, you've been in games this long and you don't know what blah means? Okay.
Yeah. To you, that may be like death of the self, right? Like that may be something that hurts your survival, but that's just kind of your genetic makeup, the way you've kind of the way you kind of grew up, and that's okay. I've got my own dark sides, and
exactly
everyone does, and we're all working with them, right?
But know them.
Know
your dark side, because when you look at those values, the leaders that you most respect, what did they do? How did they behave? There might be someone out there who's like, look, my objective in life is to make a whole bucket ton of money and to be promoted a gajillion times and then found my own companies and become a high profile investor. And, you know, I want to someday be the one sitting in Shark Tank, right? That's my goal. I'm like, cool. I think for some people that might be fine. Does that fit inside of the moral framework in which you want to operate? And if there's a conflict between that goal and your morals, which gives? And I can tell you, I think the goal should give. I think the career should give, the hard things. But it's easy for me to say that in the abstract. You might have kids and a family. You know, you may have bills to pay. You may have a lot of complexity in your life that means that, like, look, normally, if it was me by myself, you know, you hear that a lot. Like, if I was just a single guy by myself, I would just, you know, through that wall or whatever. But I got a couple of kids, I got a mortgage, I got a car payment. Like, life is hard right now. I am disincentivized from sticking my head out. Maybe that's wise, but be aware, again, of what you're practicing. So I'd say understand your values, understand your moral frame, know where you feel like you should bend and break. It's not locked in. You can change. Some of that stuff will shift, especially, it's funny. It's not like, you know, if you value courage today, you're likely to at some point in the future just not value courage. But what courage is will become more nuanced as you grow older. And all your values will. As you advance in leadership, everything just becomes more like the simple circle just starts having edges around it everywhere. And you just like everything just becomes a fractal. And that's normal. That's okay. it doesn't mean that the core was bad. So know what your core is. Try to live that out with integrity as best you can. Give yourself some grace if you fail, because you will, but also get back on the right path that you believe is the right path and way to operate. I think many leaders inherit the value system of the organization they are in or the culture they are in. So like, well, what should I do? I should become highly successful. Why? Because everybody knows you should be highly successful. You should be as highly successful as you can be. That's like a U.S. cultural norm. Arguably a Western world one, but really strong in the U.S. Like, you should become the most impactful, highest paid, most successful person you can be. That's your goal. It's like, is it? And by the way, I'll put something else out there. If that is your goal right now, many people who have made it there have ended up no happier than many of the people that did not get there, and in fact are often less happy. We're sold a lie that money will solve all your problems, and it won't. So anyway, I think that's what I'd say. Know your values, know where you're willing to bend, and be thoughtful about that, and revisit that over time to see if you're becoming the person that you used to be angry at, because it happens way easier than you'd think. Like, we all have a villain inside of us. And the way we stumble into wrong, to like living an immoral life, is not, it's rarely we were going along and an opportunity to do great evil came and we were just like, yeah, I'm into great evil. It's usually a million small steps that become an avalanche. Like, that's how you end up with becoming somebody you never thought you'd become, in a bad way. Hopefully you become someone you never thought you'd become in a good way. And I think that also is the same thing. It's a million little decisions.
Ben, your passion for leadership and just everything. This conversation has been incredible, and I really want to thank you for coming on. And this has been the longest podcast in my short stint of all my podcast episodes. So I
can talk.
I know,
I can talk.
And it has been a pleasure to listen. I know this will be a fantastic episode. So thank you for coming on, and
well, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. You did a fantastic job with the questions. So thank you.